Hey everyone, this is K.N.Fitzwater, and this is the first video recording. And someone had asked me, how do I go about planning or writing in general? And it's a little bit of a vague question, and it's going to require a lot of a lengthier explanation than what I would on paper. And I figured that if this person asked for, I'm sure everyone else would want to know. I am what you call a intuitive writer. Intuitives are the type of people that don't have a outline in the beginning of the writing process. They kind of start typing as soon as they have an idea to go with. And this is in contrast to conceptual writers, people who do have an outline, do figure out all the minutiae of the story, the setting, the rules, the characters. Famous intuitive writers are R.A. Salvatore, Stephen King. There's nothing wrong with their works as far as I know of. I have known a couple of conceptual writers on the web. They say you must have an outline, and that's not true for J.K. Rowling, but it's not really set in stone for R. Salvatore. So I don't exactly have an outline. I kind of have an idea where I want the story to go, but it's not like I have a writing post like, okay, I gotta reach this point, I gotta reach that point. As I'm writing my first draft, I am discovering as I go. I think more people should try this route. Writing out a concept is not working for them. I tried writing a story with an outline in my head and try to go this route of having a pre-plan and research. And it didn't work out too well because I was rushing to the guidepost, the story structure, and it was just a mess. And I had to put that story on the shelf. I will get to it. It's just I will have to work on it some other time after this book is done editing. This book, I just didn't have any general plans other than let's create a short story, and it just exploded. I'm glad it did. It's a better story than what I originally had planned. The concept for the characters I originally had grew and developed into these really complex people. It's just a more complex and engaging environment, at least for me. I continue to edit this book. I'll go ahead and massage more of the world, more of the complexity in it. It's just more of a better read, at least I hope. When I start, I kind of have an idea how I'm going to start the words. People are afraid when they start writing, they see a blank page and they just freeze up. And that happens when you have nothing going on in your head. It's best to start writing when you do have an idea and you just can't get it out and you just gotta start working with it. The story was no different. Something that's been brewing in my mind like a few weeks, like a couple of weeks before I actually start typing it. It just transformed from there. Don't start writing if you have a blank concept, like there's nothing in your head whatever. Just start when you have an idea of a story and just kind of start building. The way I did for this story, the Doppelganger Queen, I threw them into a situation where they have to start solving it. The main character has his own problem he's got to solve, and the minor characters have their own problems they got to resolve also. And I started putting obstacles in their path, and if they do accomplish their goals that they're wanting to do, it's either a hollow victory where they realize, oh, this just generated more problems or more issues, kind of like a monkey's paw situation. So you always want conflict and obstacles in your story. That was the problem I had before this book. I was too nice. And I really don't want anyone hurt, and I want everyone to be happy, and that's not what story's about. Story's about rising above the obstacles that comes into your life, finding a way to get over them somehow. In the fantasy world, you probably have to attack monsters. In the real world, it's trying to go through people's personalities and relationships and trying to have a better life. In the first draft, after I tried to put one obstacle or another, I tried to intensify it until it comes to a point where the main hero, male or female, doesn't matter, has a choice they gotta make. And it's either, if I do this, I'm going to regret it choice. It's a deep character moment that now, because of this moment, they can now be a totally different person. And a lot of can of worms had happened from that choice, and eventually they crawl out of it through the help of their friends and their associates that had come together to lift this character up. And they are able to come up with a plan to solve something, and that leads to the end of the book or the story. They call it the third act or the fifth act or the sixth act or whatever act. It's pretty much the last quarter of the story where things are finally congealed. They have a plan and they're going to go and pretty much blow up the Death Star, or let's go ahead and get Loki. Stuff like that. They have to conquer and change something that's been going wrong this whole time. That's kind of how I did it in the first draft. Story structure comes in my editing process. Conceptual writers look at the story structure and do it beforehand. I do it afterwards as a checklist to see what I have done right and what I need to fix. Everyone thinks that this is some sort of cookie cutter formula. It's not really a formula. It's how to make sure your story is better grasped by the readers. It's a kind of checkpoint. It's just making sure that you have the highs and lows in the right areas in your story, making sure they have that wonderful roller coaster feel. Sometimes that comes intuitively, sometimes you got to plan for it, and that's where the divide of writers come in. And we really shouldn't be fighting or telling people you should do one way or the other. I think one should try both, and if one is an aspiring writer, and see what works for them. I discovered this works for me better. I have been telling stories to my sister since I was a little kid. It kind of comes to me a little bit naturally. I can't all write stories very well now. I prefer, writing it down. Other people just need like a pre-plan to go and get into that, and there's nothing wrong. So just finding out what works for you, and this is how I did it in the first draft. The editing is just it's like ripping the house apart for the yard sale, and then after you get the cash from the yard sale, it's adding more junk back in. But it's better junk, it's more efficient and it's going to be used. This story, I had to rip out a couple of chapters because it didn't suit for the story. Because it was such a small story, it was less than 300 pages in manuscript format, I had to add more. It's a fantasy genre, so I'm allowed to add more to the story. This required a lot of work because I had to explain things. I had to start connecting some of the dots a little bit better. As I'm writing, I realized, oh, this is so much better than what I had originally intended. So it's taking a lot longer because I found a little bit more inspiration to tell a better story than what I had, but it's more concentrated in a chapter or in a paragraph or in a scene. That joy in the editing process, it's not as grueling as people like to say it is. There's more scope to telling in the editing process. But once you finalize the story, you try to keep it that way until you shoot it off to the beta readers. and the agents and the publishers, and then they could start restructuring that story so that way it will come up a little bit better. That's kind of the general process of how I do it. If you have any more questions, go ahead and leave it in the comments. I'll go ahead and answer them. Okay, bye.